Today is Saturday, January 22nd. Now that every American household can sign up to get 4 at-home COVID-19 tests from the federal government for free, we're talking all about COVID testing, answering some top questions about when to use each type of test, their accuracy, and their availability. Our expert today has been tracking the development of COVID-19 tests throughout this pandemic. Dr. Gigi Gronvall is an immunologist and senior scholar at Johns Hopkins University. She's clearing up some misconceptions about at-home testing, sharing her take on the CDC's latest isolation guidelines, and much more. Welcome to the Newsworthy Special Edition Saturday, when we sit down with a different expert or celebrity every Saturday to talk about something in the news. Don't forget to tune in every Monday through Friday for our regular episodes, where we provide all the day's news in 10 minutes. I'm Erica Mandy. It's now time for today's Special Edition Saturday. Dr. Gigi Gronvall, thank you for coming on the Newsworthy.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to start by digging into at-home COVID tests. More and more people are starting to use them. When are they appropriate to use?
Rapid antigen tests are super convenient because you can use them at home and you can get an answer in 15 to 30 minutes, and whether or not you are contagious at that time. They're very good at telling you if you have a lot of virus in your nose.
Expand a little bit about how accurate they are, especially with this latest Omicron variant.
It turns out that they are extremely comparable to PCR tests, which had been considered the gold standard. When you're most infectious, PCR and rapid antigen tests are over 97% comparable. So a lot of the bad rap that rapid antigen tests had are because it's not quite as sensitive as PCR, but that turns out to be an advantage. Sometimes PCR can be so sensitive that it can pick up infections that are in the past. And that's not what you really need. You want a test that shows, okay, I need to isolate now.
I want to ask you about my personal experience, just in case one of our listeners also had something like this and also has this question. My son had COVID-19, had a PCR test, was positive. I had cold-like symptoms. I have been vaccinated and boosted. A couple days after I started having symptoms, I took an at-home test and it showed negative, even though I would assume that I was positive because my son had it and I was having some cold-like symptoms. What's your response to hearing that it was negative? What should I take away from that result?
You may have had a low-grade infection, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you had a lot of virus that was in your nose and therefore in the air around your nose that you might have been as much of a danger to others. I think we're seeing a lot more of these kind of paradoxical sort of testing results that probably have to do with people's immunities. If you're vaccinated or triple vaxxed, you will probably feel symptoms before you're going to turn positive on a test. I tell people, though, that if you're feeling symptoms, you've had a contact, isolate for 5 days and wear a mask for another 5 if you're around other people.
So we've talked a little bit about the difference between PCR being more sensitive and rapid tests still being a good tool and being pretty close to that. When do you think each of those methods are the appropriate tests to use? I've heard from some other experts that perhaps try to use PCR for diagnosis and then rapid tests for when you can end isolation. Would you agree? What would you say to that?
I would think that if you need a verification of your test results, I would go for a PCR test, like if you need to show your employer, or you need to get on a flight, or you need to show proof to send your child back to daycare or school, whatever it is, you want to have that verification from a laboratory, and that's most often going to be a PCR test. When it comes to should you end isolation, it's a better idea to use the rapid antigen tests, but it's not necessarily going to tell you that it's 100%. You might still be positive on the rapid antigen test and might not be much of an infectious risk.
So just for clarity's sake, because I think people are getting so much information and it can be confusing, what's the bottom line for people and how they use both tests?
Bottom line is you want to know that you have COVID so that you can isolate. Both kinds of tests, PCR, rapid antigen tests, will give you that piece of information.
So if you're not showing symptoms, you're not aware of being around anybody that had COVID-19 and an at-home test says negative before you go to a friend's house, let's say, do you feel that people can trust that for the most part?
Yeah, I do tell people should remember that tests are a moment in time. So you can use tests to reduce your risks of getting together, and that's a great idea. But there is no such thing as reducing your risk to zero. You don't know at what point you might have gotten infected, and it takes some time while the virus is making lots and lots of copies of itself before you will turn positive on any test. And so there is going to be some potential risk that you could be infected, but not yet test positive.
You mentioned the CDC latest guidelines about isolation briefly before, that it's essentially, and there's some more details to it, but essentially 5 days of isolation followed by 5 days of masking. And that was kind of controversial when it came out. They later then said, we recommend getting tested if you can, but there was really no requirement. Any takeaway that you want for people when it comes to those latest guidelines?
The guidelines originally were 10 days and then you can stop isolating. So simple 10 days, whether you were vaccinated or not, or triple vaxxed or not, it was the same 10 days. And that didn't make as much sense. So a lot of people were calling for different guidance if you were vaccinated, because people who are vaccinated, people who are boosted, they clear the virus faster even if they're infected. So even if you get Omicron, you're definitely able to fight it off faster than somebody who is unvaccinated. It's not just the severity, you're actually getting rid of it faster. And then there's the consideration that for the most part, people are most infectious really early on in the infection, so within the first 5 days. And then you have the real world considerations like medical professionals need to go back to work and they feel fine, but we have staffing shortages. And so you have these kind of real world issues. Plus a lot of people weren't doing it at all. And 10 days was too long and they were just going back to work. I think CDC could have done a much better job of explaining some of all these trade-offs and some of these considerations. But in a situation where not everybody has access to a test, but everybody has access to a calendar, settling on a specified time when you can stop isolating and enter the world, but wearing a well-fitting mask, it seemed reasonable to me.
Still ahead, if there's a new COVID variant, will current tests still be able to detect it? Also, why there's been a shortage of tests and why Dr. Gronvall expects that to change soon. Those answers and more coming up. But first, let's take a quick break to thank our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. I was recently talking to a friend about something she was going through, and she felt like it wasn't big enough of an issue to go to therapy. But here's the thing. You do not have to wait until something feels unbearable to get some help. In fact, therapy can help you deal with something before things get worse. I think of it like taking care of my physical health. It's important to be proactive. And with BetterHelp, you don't even need to change out of your pajamas because you can talk to a licensed professional counselor from the comfort of your own home. Whether you're texting, talking on the phone, or connecting on a video call, it's secure and confidential. BetterHelp has counselors who are specialized in stress, anxiety, grief, relationships, and much more. And if you're ever not happy with yours, just change counselors anytime until you find the right fit. It's even more affordable than traditional offline counseling, and financial aid is available. I want you to start living a happier life today. As a listener, you'll get 10% off your first month by visiting betterhelp.com/newsworthy. Again, that's BetterHelp, H-E-L-P, betterhelp.com/newsworthy. This episode is also brought to you by Seed. Along with the multivitamin that I take every day, I also take Seed's Daily Synbiotic. In fact, it's the first thing I take every morning. It's a probiotic plus prebiotic developed for systemic benefits. So yes, it supports digestive health, and it also goes beyond that. It helps maintain healthy gut barrier function and gut immune function. It promotes heart health and supports healthy skin and more. And to make sure the live probiotics actually go where they're supposed to go, Seed's Daily Synbiotic has capsule-in-capsule technology. So it helps protect it from stomach acid and enzymes as it makes its way to the small intestine for absorption. So bottom line, you're getting a 24-strain broad-spectrum probiotic and prebiotic that has been clinically and scientifically studied. And as an added bonus, this is a company that cares about the earth. Your Daily Synbiotic is sustainably delivered monthly. As an example, the shipping box is constructed from ecological paper made from algae that would otherwise damage fragile marine ecosystems. So go get your 15% off your first month's supply of Seed's Daily Synbiotic by visiting seed.com/newsworthy or by using the code newsworthy at checkout. That's seed.com/newsworthy or use code newsworthy at checkout. Okay, now back to my conversation with Dr. Gigi Gronvall. What do you think the biggest misconception about testing is right now?
Some people tell me that they think the test didn't work and because, well, I took a test yesterday and then today I tested positive. Like, what was wrong with that test yesterday? And I think that just speaks to the complexity of this. You don't turn positive the second you get infected. It takes some time before you will turn positive on any test. And I think that interval can be kind of confusing.
So this week, the Biden administration launched a new website where households can get 4 free COVID tests at a time. What do you think are the pros and cons of this strategy, and what do you want people to know about it?
It's great that tests are being made available. You can fill out this very simple form and 4 tests will be mailed to you within a couple weeks. That's great. That's not the only way that tests are going to get into your hands. There's partnerships to give tests to schools, to local public health departments. So I think you're going to start to see tests being pretty available in the coming weeks, as well as on the pharmacy shelves. And there's additional testing manufacturers that have gotten authorization, so there'll be more options for tests. And there's also mechanisms to get reimbursed through your insurance, although a lot of critics of that approach are pointing out that it's a little complicated to do. But I think you're going to start seeing tests be super available in the coming weeks. And it's good. It's not going to stop the pandemic, but it should hopefully stop some people from getting COVID because people will use these tests to make better decisions.
Assuming that they do become very available, that'll be a little bit of a change. I mean, recently we've been seeing extremely long lines in some places to get tested. At-home tests have been hard to find at many stores. What happened there?
Early in the spring, there were tons of tests available on the shelves, and nobody was buying them. And the manufacturers took that as a signal that, oh, well, I guess nobody wants these. And they shut down manufacturing plants that were making them. And then the Delta variant hit, and it's like, wait a second, where are the tests? And so it became clear that that sort of supply, demand, push-pull mechanism to get tests onto the market was really not going to work. And so a few things were done to increase manufacturing. The government had some direct contracting, but even though it helped a little bit, the effort was just no match for the demand that the Omicron variant spurred. So over the holidays, there's tons of demand and demand for PCR tests too. And laboratories that would process those tests were having staffing shortages because people had COVID. This was just a big mess. I think the approach now to make testing more available, to bolster it, to make sure it's not going to be influenced by people's supply and demand issues, I think all that's great. I hope that we remember that in a few months, if there is low demand and we have a lot of tests, I hope that people just remember, like, it's better to have these tests just in case and not have that crunch if we need them and they aren't there. There's no reason why Omicron is going to be the last variant. We have to think ahead that we could have a surge in demand yet again, and we want to be ready for it.
And can we expect that the tests available now will at least be a tool with future variants still?
This is something that the FDA and other laboratories look for. So you can feel confident that if there is a new variant, that's some of the first things that are done is to check to make sure that PCR tests and the rapid antigen tests are still accurate. The tests that we have been pretty stable for all the variants of concern. You can't project the future, and certainly when it comes to COVID, but the diversifying the number of manufacturers and the fact that they are not looking generally for spike proteins, which is the part of the virus that's changing the most, it's a good indicator that hopefully they will all be good tests even with another variant.
Is there one final thought or takeaway you want to end on?
Well, I think that just in a big picture, I think this whole experience has showed that people really want this information, that they want to know if they are sick, what they're sick with. And I hope that manufacturers and everyone think about, well, what else do we want to know? And when my kids were little, I really wished that I had some at-home tests to be able to know, like, is this really something I need to take them to the doctor for? Or can I just let them rest at home and get better? And so tests for flu, for strep, for all kinds of things would perhaps be really useful to have at home. And I hope that someday that is a possibility, because it's no fun to drag somebody who's feeling sick to a doctor's office to get tested. And it's better to know if it's something that you should be doing. So I hope that spurs some more at-home tests for people.
And remember, the government website where you can order 4 at-home tests for free is covidtests.gov. Of course, we'll continue to bring you all the latest news to know during our regular 10-minute episodes Monday through Friday. We'll be back on Monday. Until then, have a great weekend.